Alright, so this video is for anybody that wants to become a web developer in 2017. Whether you're just starting out and you know absolutely nothing about coding, or you're a front-end developer and you're not sure where to go next, even if you're one of the lucky people that know everything and you want to just get a sense of what technologies are currently in, this guide's going to benefit you. Alright, so we're going to take a look step by step at which technologies you should focus on and at what point you should move on and start to learn something else. Alright, when you're a web developer, you can never get too comfortable. If you stay at the same level of just building HTML, CSS, and basic JavaScript sites, your entire business is going to be eaten up by something like Wix. There's now programs that can do your entire job and can do it better than many of the web designers out there. Alright, so you need to stay ahead of the machines. Alright, so let's create a plan to make you the best developer possible. So where do you start? This is actually probably the easiest question of all. Anyone that tells you to learn anything other than HTML and CSS first is not a web developer. And the reason that you learn these first is because HTML and CSS are the building blocks of the web, of all websites, all web applications. Even if you have the most advanced web application running on a server powered by Node.js or PHP with all types of functionality and databases, the most complex backend possible, the front of that website is still going to be produced with HTML and CSS and probably some client-side JavaScript. And HTML handles the markup and presentation, CSS handles the styling and the positioning. Another really important reason to learn HTML and CSS is because there's no alternatives. Okay, these are always used and there's no way to be a web developer without knowing them. When it comes to server-side languages, you have a choice between PHP, Ruby on Rails, Java, tons of different technologies. But as far as the front end, you need to know HTML and CSS. Yes, you have HTML5 and XHTML and so on, but they all stem from the same tag syntax, and once you know one, the other is really easy to learn. Alright, when it comes to HTML5 versus HTML4 or XHTML, it's your preference, but I would always suggest using HTML5. It's less strict, it has more features, and it's by far more popular. Now, you can get by in the world of server-side programming by knowing, let's say, 50% of PHP. However, when it comes to HTML and CSS, you really should know them inside and out. Okay, you should be able to position anything anywhere on the page and know exactly what tags to wrap those elements in. This really shouldn't be a big deal because both of these things are really easy to learn. They're not programming languages with tough logic to grasp. It's simple markup and style sheets. Alright, it's very declarative and they're just really simple to learn relative to other programming technologies. Alright, so you learn HTML and CSS. Now let's take a look at some of the basic tools that you're going to need to create your websites. Alright, so first of all, you're going to need a text editor, and there's a ton out there. It's all preference. Everyone's different. Some people can just use Windows Notepad. And if you want to step it up a notch, you could go to Notepad 2, which gives you some extra features. I would suggest using something like Sublime Text or Atom.io, which are basically advanced text editors. They're not quite IDEs, but they do have really nice code highlighting. They have plugins, and there's just a lot of different features that are really helpful. If you want, you could get some kind of IDE. You could use Dreamweaver or NetBeans or maybe some kind of premium software, but I wouldn't suggest that. I mean, it's all preference. If you want to spend some money on a really complicated IDE, you can do that, but I just think it overcomplicates things. A lot of stuff that you really don't need. If you're coding Java or C# or something like that, that's a little different, where you have to compile code and all that. That's something that you probably do want an IDE for. But I would suggest Sublime Text overall. So image editing, don't let this overwhelm you. I know, Photoshop and Illustrator, these are really complicated, powerful programs. You just need to know the basics, okay? So basic image slicing, cropping, things like that. If you want to resize an image, just very basic things when it comes to, at least in web design. All right, now if you don't want to spend the money for Photoshop and Adobe products, you could use something like GIMP or something else. I personally use Photoshop. That's all I've ever really used. So I don't know too many options, but just do a quick Google search and you'll find a bunch of different great options. You also want an FTP client. I would suggest FileZilla, and then an SSH tool, which it gives you a way to access your server, your remote server. PuTTY is a good one for Windows. SSH isn't something that you need to know at this point, but you do need to know at least FTP so you can get your files onto the server. Okay, you also want a good browser. You can either use Chrome, or Chrome. I'm just kidding. If you like Firefox or even Internet Explorer, God bless you, that's fine. I would suggest Chrome. It's really fast. It has a great JavaScript engine. The dev tools are great. I wouldn't use anything else. Firefox is up there too. But yeah, you need a good browser, obviously. Cloud storage, this is something that's optional, but something that I don't do without. I use Dropbox just so I have access to my files from anywhere, from any machine. If I'm on vacation and I need to update some code, I'll use Dropbox. And of course, I also use Git and GitHub, but we'll get to that later. Alright, so basic JavaScript. Once you learn HTML and CSS, this is where I would suggest you go next. Alright, and I'm not talking about Node.js or any React or frameworks or anything like that at this point. I'm talking about basic JavaScript. So you want to learn things like data types, strings, numbers, arrays, objects, and so on. Functions, conditionals, loops, operators. These are all things that you'll need to know in any programming language. So it's really helpful for you to learn this now. If you learn how to work with functions and conditionals, that will also help you later on if you wanted to learn something like Java or C# or some high-level language. So you want to grasp the basic programming principles. All right, event handling is another one. So when you click a button, you want to fire off an event. You want something to happen dynamically on the page. All right, I'd also suggest learning JSON, which is JavaScript Object Notation. Most of the APIs that we deal with now are in JSON format, and it's really easy to learn. You could spend a day and you could learn it and master it. It's really easy. All right, so you want to get JSON under your belt at this point. jQuery is a great library for DOM manipulation. It makes a lot of things in JavaScript much easier, but I would only suggest learning it once you feel comfortable with JavaScript. All right, so learn your functions and loops and all that, and then move on to jQuery, and you'll see how much easier some things are to do when it comes to selecting things in the DOM, events, things like that. All right, so once you learn HTML, CSS, and basic JavaScript, you want to know how to deploy a website. All right, I say a website because you're not building web applications at this point. An example would be a site for some kind of business or something like that. All right, so you want to get a shared hosting account. HostGator is really good. I know a lot of you probably disagree. When it comes to hosting, everyone has different preferences. But I've dealt with HostGator for a while. I have a reseller account with them, and they've been really good as far as support and all that. InMotion, also pretty good, really cheap. You want to start with a shared hosting account to you learn cPanel, which is a really popular control panel for managing your server, your hosting account. So you can set up email accounts, you can set up your FTP accounts from there, SSH, things like that. Okay. Next thing you want to be able to do is to upload a project via FTP. So grab FileZilla, and it's all GUI, it's all drag and drop. You can take your local version of your website, your HTML site, and just drag it and upload it to your server. All right, once you do that, you'll need to register a domain name and link that to your hosting account so that you can access your website on the web. All right, and that's pretty much it as far as deploying a basic website. It's a lot easier than deploying something like a Node.js application. So once you've mastered the stuff we've talked about so far, you can call yourself a web designer. Okay, notice that designer is underlined. I wouldn't suggest calling yourself a web developer yet. Not having any knowledge of programming, logical programming, aside from basic JavaScript, really doesn't make you a developer. I mean, you could say it, but you might get some blowback in the development community. All right, so while you're a web designer, you can build simple but professional websites. So as I said, small businesses always want websites, nice looking websites, and they don't really need any special functionality, an about page, services, things like that, contact page, really easy stuff. You can build UIs for web applications, so you don't have the ability to build the back end yet and work with databases, but you can, build the UI, the user interface, and the front end. You can do PSD, or of course any image format, to HTML, CSS conversions. So a lot of times a designer might have an image of what they want, and you'll be able to take that and then use your HTML and CSS skills to turn that into a website. And you'll be able to work for a company, or you could be a freelancer. All right. Now, a web designer pay grade is going to be much lower than a programmer, but it is still, you can still make a good living. You can still, pay your bills and all that, and enjoy what you do at the same time. So where do you go next once you're basically a front-end developer or a web designer? You can move on to learn some front-end frameworks, so Bootstrap, Foundation. You could start with server-side languages like PHP or Ruby. You could start to learn JavaScript frameworks like React or Angular. Or you could start learning databases, so MySQL, Postgres, or even a NoSQL database. Out of these choices, what I would choose to do next is front-end frameworks. All right, and the reason for that is frameworks like Bootstrap save you a ton of time when it comes to building out UIs. They also help you with design. If you don't have a really good eye for design, if you're not a graphic designer, these frameworks will help you with that and help you create nice looking buttons and nav bars and all that. All right, so let's take a look at some of the different front-end frameworks. All right, so as I said, Twitter Bootstrap is the one that I would suggest. It's definitely the most popular, has the most features. Foundation, I would say, is in second place. Has a lot of the same stuff Bootstrap has, the grid system, all that. And then you have others which I haven't really used. Skeleton, MUI, and Pure are some of them. There's a lot more. I can't really say too much about them because I haven't used them too much. All right, now let's say Twitter Bootstrap, for example, gives us a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, so it gives us CSS components to work with, buttons, list groups, form and input controls, and formats them to look really nice. All right, so we don't have to add custom individual styles for each of these elements. Also gives us helper classes, so if we want to float things or align text, we can just add a simple class on it. We don't have to actually write out the CSS. Grid system, probably one of the best things about using these frameworks. Allows you to lay things out on the page without having to do your custom floats and all that. If you want a 3-column row or 4-column row, it's really easy to do. You just add a couple classes. And another big plus to that is that it makes your site responsive. All right, and what that means is that your site is going to adapt to whatever screen it's being looked at on. So if your users are on a mobile device, the grid will it'll reshape itself for that screen size, and it'll look good on that device as well as a 27-inch desktop screen. All right, so that's a huge plus. JavaScript widgets are also available. So Bootstrap has things like slideshows, collapsible tabs, things like that you can implement really easily. So next thing I would do is choose a server-side programming language. So we have PHP, which is not the best language structurally, but it is rock solid and it's not going anywhere. Now I realize that as I go through these, a lot of you are going to disagree with what I say, which is absolutely fine. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, but PHP is a strong language. It's been used on all the huge websites. It works really well with relational databases like MySQL. All right, so you have PHP. Another one is Node.js, which is a really new and exciting and powerful framework. It's not a language, it's a JavaScript runtime. Okay, so it is JavaScript, and what's attractive about this is you probably know some JavaScript, so what you would do is just add on to your JavaScript skills with Node.js, and you also need to understand some fundamentals about server-side code and how that works. But since you know JavaScript already, this may be a good choice. All right, we also have Ruby and Ruby on Rails, which is a framework. Now, this is a really powerful framework. You can build really advanced web applications, but it has leveled off a little bit. The community is kind of quiet right now, at least from what I've seen. I would suggest learning Ruby on Rails, but not first. We also have Python, which is really easy to learn. It's not as popular. It's more for scripting type tasks. I would suggest going with PHP or Node.js. And notice I do have PHP underlined. That's ultimately what I would suggest. One, because that's what I did, and I think that you already know some JavaScript, so I think it's healthy to start to learn a different language as well, and you can see the similarities and the differences between both. Alright, so now that you know a server-side language, you want to start to work with databases. And by no means do you have to master the server-side language before working with databases. These actually go hand in hand. Alright, so first of all we have relational databases, which are databases that run on tables. Okay, your data is kept in tables. In those tables you have columns, sort of like an Excel spreadsheet, but on a much higher level. Alright, so we have MySQL, which is extremely popular, also extremely easy to use. We have PostgreSQL, which is similar to MySQL, but it's a little more advanced and, in my opinion, a little more powerful. I would suggest you learning MySQL first because it's easier, and it's also, there's a huge community, it's really popular. You also have NoSQL databases, or non-relational databases, and these work similar to JSON. Okay, so if you have a JSON array in JavaScript, you have these objects that are wrapped in a curly brace, and then you have key value pairs. That's ultimately what a NoSQL database looks like, especially something like MongoDB, which is a document database. A document database is just a type of NoSQL database. You also have column databases and a couple other ones. CouchDB is another really popular NoSQL database. Now, you need to pick a combination here, and I would definitely suggest either PHP and MySQL or Node.js and MongoDB. Okay, so these two go together really well. PHP, MySQL, Node, and Mongo. So if you're learning PHP, I would also suggest MySQL alongside of that. Okay, same thing with Mongo with Node. So at this point, there are some other technologies that you should be learning as well. One is Git, which is a version control system. This allows you to basically save versions of your applications. You also want some kind of repository. GitHub is definitely the most popular. It makes it easy to back up your work. It makes it easy to share your work with other developers. You can create branches so that you don't actually affect the main repository, the main code, and you can add some kind of functionality, for instance a login or something like that, and then you can merge it with the master branch without any kind of interruption in the code for other people working on it. Alright, so it's a really important thing to learn. also should start to get your feet wet with the command line. Okay, so basic command line tools and commands. SSH is really important. You use SSH a little bit when you're working with Git, and it gives you a better, faster way to work with the server. You can upload files, things like that. So you want to start to look into that stuff. Alright, now as far as the front end, you also want to start to learn some CSS precompilers. Pick either Sass or Less, they're very similar, and these give you a more efficient way to write your CSS. You can use variables, which is really powerful, mix-ins, which are like functions in CSS. You can nest styles, you can do a whole bunch of stuff. I actually have a few good videos on my channel on both actually. But I would suggest Sass. It's a little more powerful and a little easier to use. You also want to start to learn about APIs and REST services. With your browser, you can make HTTP requests, whether it's a GET request to fetch data from a server or a POST request to upload data to a server. You want to get familiar with HTTP and RESTful services. All right, and I also have some videos on creating REST APIs on my channel. HTTPS and SSL, you also want to learn a little bit about that so that you can create secure sites, and you can upload SSL certificates and get into that as well. Alright, so deploying apps, you want to move away from a shared hosting account and start to learn more about dedicated servers and VPS. VPS is a virtual private server, which is basically a dedicated virtual machine that you rent out. Okay, you get a lot of the same abilities as you would get with a dedicated server, but it is cheaper. Alright, now as far as app hosting, there's a lot of different services, especially if you're using Node.js and JavaScript technologies. You can look into Heroku, DigitalOcean, which basically gives you what's called a droplet, and it's basically a little Linux instance, okay, or it's just a little Linux server that they give you, and you have complete access. You can do or install whatever you'd like on it. You also have AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, which offer a whole bunch of services as far as hosting, as far as storage, things like that. So you want to read a little bit about that. Okay, deploy tools. All right, so for instance, if you're using Node.js, you might want to look into something like Flightplan, which allows you to easily deploy your application onto a remote server. Deploying can get a little tricky. I'm actually going to be coming out with a deployment series, hopefully, that shows you how to deploy these apps. I know that on my channel we have a lot of tutorials on building these apps, but not much on actually getting them out there. Alright, so hopefully I will have that for you guys in the future. You also want to learn a little bit about the Linux command line. Okay, when you're working with dedicated servers, chances are it's going to be a Linux server. Just basic how to get around file structures, how to create files. You probably want to learn Nano or some kind of command line text editor, those kind of things. All right, and you want to know how to do maintenance on your apps, and also how to update them when they're on a remote server. All right, so if you have learned what we've talked about up to this point, you're now a web developer. You can create simple to advanced web applications. You can build back-end APIs. All right, hopefully you can build RESTful services, and you know a little bit about HTTP requests and all that. Also, you can work with servers, whether it's an Apache server or an Express server or something like that. Also, admin databases. So if you're working with PHP and MySQL, you should know how to go into the database and add tables and all of that, whether it's through the command line or it's through a tool like PHPMyAdmin. If you're working with Node.js and Mongo, you should be able to know how to use the Mongo shell. And once you know all this stuff, you should be able to get a really, really good job, or you could keep freelancing and up your prices, or you could start your own business. Alright, so once you know languages and databases and all that, you might want to look into frameworks, which can really help you streamline your development. Can really speed things up. Okay, so JavaScript has a whole set of frameworks. We have React, which is a UI framework. It's actually a library, but it could be a framework as well. And it is to help you build really powerful user interfaces. All right, it doesn't handle database access, things like that. It's more in the UI, but it's extremely powerful for building interfaces. You also have Angular 2, which is more of a full client-side framework. It has an HTTP module, so you can make post requests and all that. You also have Vue.js, which is similar to React as it works in the Vue model. And then you have Express, which is a back-end framework for Node.js that can handle routing and templates and all that stuff. All right, so you want to pick one of these, one or two of them, and learn that as well. Now, if you're into PHP, you have a whole bunch of different frameworks you can choose from. So Laravel seems to be the most popular, one of the most powerful. It is a little difficult to learn. If you want something easier, I would suggest CodeIgniter. It's not as powerful, it's not as popular right now, but it is really easy to learn and can really set the stage for you to learn other frameworks as well. All right, another one is Symfony, which is also really powerful, but kind of tough to learn. Now, if you want to do something else aside from JavaScript and PHP, you could do Ruby on Rails, which uses the Ruby programming language. Also really popular, but as I said earlier, it is kind of leveling off a little bit. Now, most of these frameworks have a certain design pattern called MVC, which stands for Model View Controller, and that's really important for you to understand. So the idea of this is that a model is the part of the application that works with the database, okay? Makes calls to the database, brings in data, inserts, updates data, things like that. The view works with the user interface, okay? So the templates, the part of the application that the user sees. And then the controller basically handles the routing, it handles when to call model functions, things like that. And these MVC frameworks handle things like routing, database mapping, they offer different helpers for various tasks, data binding, templating, and UI. Okay, so they're all different. Some of them may only use certain aspects of MVC, but it is a really important design pattern for you to learn. All right, so content management systems, and I'm talking about PHP content management systems like WordPress, Joomla, Drupal. These are tools that allow you to basically build websites without having programming knowledge to an extent. If you really want to customize these websites and applications, you will need to know PHP and, of course, HTML and CSS. But you can install WordPress or Joomla or Drupal without any programming experience whatsoever. But I would definitely suggest learning the stuff that we've already talked about, at least front-end development and maybe a little PHP before using these systems, at least on a client level or on a business level. All right, so these technologies are great for client work and maintenance. The reason I say that is when you build a WordPress website, for example, you can give your customer the back-end admin login. They can go in and then they can update their articles, they can add blog posts, they can do all this stuff on their own without having to bother you to edit the code. And I'll tell you that when I ran my company, Tech Guy Web Solutions, I focused mostly on Joomla. Joomla has kind of died down since that time, but it was really popular. And it was a great platform. They have a lot of great components and modules. And I would build the Joomla site and give my clients that info, and they would handle the updates of the blog and all of that. Now, I did it kind of backwards. I started to use Joomla on a professional level before I even knew a lot of PHP, and that really limited me because clients would ask for stuff, and I couldn't do it. I mean, I could look for other components to do kind of what they wanted, but not really. I couldn't go in and edit the PHP, and that was a big mistake. I should have really learned PHP before I started to work with that stuff on a client level. All right, so that's why I put this way at the end here. All right, so with all of these, WordPress, Joomla, Drupal, there's thousands of plugins and add-ons that can do all kinds of stuff. You have e-commerce plugins, you have SEO plugins, pretty much anything. They all have their own repositories where you can download them and install them. Most are free, some are not. This makes for really fast development, especially if you're using not a custom theme, but something that you buy or that you download, and you're using pre-made modules and all that. It makes it really fast, but it can be very limiting. All right. If you're using a theme that someone else made, it can be really hard to tweak that to make it the way you want it. All right. Sometimes you probably just want to build your own custom theme. All right. But of course you have to know how to do that. Now I have WordPress underlined because at this time that's definitely what I would suggest. It started out as a blogging platform, but it's really now just a complete website and web application platform. Not only that, but I think it's the easiest to customize. WordPress themes are really easy to build. I do have a bunch of tutorials on that as well. Building plugins isn't too hard. So I would just definitely suggest WordPress at this time. All right, so now you're going to want to start to look at mobile app development. It is the future. Obviously, everyone has a smartphone and a tablet, so you definitely want to look into this. You don't need to learn Java and Objective-C. And I chose I'm talking about these languages because Java is the official language for Android. Objective-C is for iOS, for Apple. But with the addition of technologies like React Native, Ionic, Cordova, these allow us to build mobile apps using JavaScript. Okay, so we can build out JavaScript applications and then wrap them in a native container using something like Ionic and Cordova. And then React Native, which is awesome new technology, allows us to use the React framework to be able to do this. It actually creates native components from React code. All right, so now what? Now what do you do after you know all this stuff? Okay, so now you can focus on your career, focus on your business, promote your business, find clients, all that good stuff. You do want to go back and learn more. If at this point you've mastered PHP and MySQL, I would suggest to go back and learn Node.js and MongoDB, because the more skills you have, the better you're going to do as a developer. Keep up to date with the latest technologies, of course. You don't want to fall behind and have Wix now, building PHP sites in one click and taking your job away from you. You want to, know all the latest technologies. You may want to go and learn a high-level language like Java or C#, which I have yet to do. I mean, I know the basics, but I would like to get more into that. It's not needed, but, just a suggestion. All right, so that's it for this guide. To learn most of these technologies that we've talked about, you can visit traversymedia.com, check out my courses by Eduonix, and of course subscribe to my channel. I know this was kind of a long guide, and hopefully, you guys that stayed with me, thank you for that. And I will be making more of these types of videos because I really want to help you guys that are getting into web development. I know how tough it can be, and I know that there's a ton of technologies, and it's wicked overwhelming. You don't know where to go from where. So hopefully I can help you guys with that. And thanks for watching.